Hey folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. In today's episode, we're going to continue our beginner series, and we're going to be profiling and drilling holes and surface grinding our knife. Let's go right down to the table, take a look, and see what we're going to do today. So here's our knife from the forging episode last time. We can see that it's overall just over about 9.5 inches. It's got about a 4.5 inch handle. You can see when I hold it, I have a little bit of a handle sticking out and a little bit of this, so that's pretty perfect. Plus my hands are pretty big, so it should be the right size. So before we get into anything else, I want to talk about parts of a knife and the important parts of knife design before we get into profiling, because we want to make sure that we pay attention to those areas. So the very first thing is the spine. I always tell people, make sure there's a very purposeful line between the knife and the back of the handle. Okay, this shouldn't be, here and then kind of break and then go off at a different angle. This should be a very continuous line. It might be a curved line. Very rarely, in some instances, but very rarely will curve this way. Most knives will either be straight or will curve this way. So that's one thing to make sure. Have a nice continuous line. Next, this part, the heel. Okay, on a full tang knife like this part will not be sharpened right here, unless it's a chef knife, but that's a very different knife and it won't have this kind of swell here, typically. Okay, that's going to protect your hand here, okay, because this is not going to be 2 inches wide like a chef knife, so you need something to protect your hand from hitting the blade. That's what this ricasso area is for. So we need to make sure that right here, the width this way, the thickness is the same here. The thickness of this blade is the same all the way down. It doesn't thin out here. Holding it this way, this should be the full thickness of the ricasso. So some other things to pay attention to. The other thing is that this should not sweep up here. It's very odd when the heel comes up like that. The heel should end, and there's usually a sharp transition down into the handle, okay, meaning this point. So pay attention to this here and don't cut this corner off when you're doing the profiling. Looking at the handle, same thing here. I like to do the same thing with the handle. I don't typically like to round these off. I like a bit of a swell on the back of the handle, especially for these utilitarian knives, so that it fits nice and it doesn't slide out of your hand because this part has a swell. So that's what we're going to be going for. And there's also usually a palm swell. You can optionally do a finger choil, which is something like this design, and then your palm. What I don't recommend is don't put multiple choils like this. Rarely does that work. It only works for one size of hand, so stick to either one finger choil and then the rest, or just do this and a palm swell. Alright, so the very first step we're going to do is we're going to grind the profile, or the edge of the knife, into the design that we want. Okay, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to assume that you have some kind of grinder. I will not be using my grinder in the horizontal position. I'm going to assume that you have a simple grinder. So I'm going to do all my grinding just to match that. So I have two grinders. I have a Broadbeck, and this over here is a house-made Revolution. I'm going to be, just for this one, I'm going to be using the Broadbeck, but these things both run pretty much identically. They do identical jobs. So I could go back and forth between them. My attachments fit on both, so I recommend both of these. So before doing any grinding, even occasionally in my shop, I always like to square my rest, because we're going to be using the rest. I want to square my rest to the platen. Because if you don't do this, you could be grinding on an angle, and that's going to screw up the whole edge of your blade because it's going to be a weird angle all the way around. Two ways you can do this. Well, first of all, I've got the rest locked in all directions. Okay, the easiest way I think is just to take a square, go up against your platen, and make sure that it's level. I see this one's off a little bit, so I'm going to adjust. Here I'm going to adjust the rest. I have a tilting rest. Otherwise, you can adjust your platen or whatever you have on your setup. Okay, make sure you've got the rest locked when you do this, okay, when you check it. The other way is to get one of these digital angle finders. This just takes longer, in my opinion, because you got to do this, and then you got to put it up there, and, you know, I don't know. I just like the square method, the old-fashioned way of putting a square up to the edge. All right, so I'm going to start doing my profiling. One thing when you're doing this, keep the knife in motion. And the reason being is if you just do a bunch of starts and stops, you'll get a bunch of faceting on your blade, and you want nice smooth curves. So always be moving the blade back and forth, especially when you do the spine, whatever you're doing. When we get to the inside curves, outside curves are very easy because you can do them on a flat platen. When we get to the the inside curves, we're going to be using the wheels on the grinder, and we'll get to those. I'll describe those when I get there. And of course, I'm going to be wearing my my mask for this. Anytime you're grinding, you should always be wearing your gear, safety glasses, and a mask, because this grinding stuff's not good for your lungs. Okay, so it's time to do the inside curves here. And this is best, obviously, with something with a radius. So we're going to be using the wheels on this grinder, and hopefully you have some kind of wheel that you can use as a contact wheel. If you don't, then you're going to have to use the edge of the platen. And what I recommended you do is hang the belt off so you have a bit of a softer edge, and then go over it like that. It's a little more challenging. It's definitely better to be able to have a wheel and gives you a perfect radius. So I'm going to use that radius up here. And you'd say, well, how am I going to maintain a perfect 90-degree angle? And this is where, so even if your grinder won't go horizontal, make a rest or some kind of fixture that will sit on your rest that you can have a plane, a surface like this, a reference surface that you can put up against your grinder. Okay, this way we have the same 90 degrees that we had before, but now we can grind horizontally, as if we flip the grinder. So now we can do these and know that we're perfectly 90 degrees. Here's our profile so far. Got all the edges ground. It looks pretty good. And you could totally go and continue with this one as the final profile. The only thing I'm going to change is this radius right here. So we used a 2-inch wheel for this, but I really like this to be a sharper one. Okay, so that involves having a small wheel. So I'm going to assume you don't have a small wheel attachment. How do you get this radius? Yeah, you could use the edge of the platen like we discussed, but another option, a cheap option, is to get yourself a set of these. Okay, they come in different radiuses. These are like sanding drums. Links down in the video description to my Amazon store where you can find these. We're going to use this size here, which I've already got chucked up in the drill. So let's go try it. So I've got my drill press set at the highest speed. I've got this Luckily I have a hole in my table here to put the drum, so let's give it a shot. It took a really long time, but I got this shaped a little differently here. You can see that it's got quite a sharper curve than a 2-inch radius. So now it fits really nice in the hand, and I really like it. Okay, next step. We got to remove some of this thickness. It's way too thick. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take an angle grinder, and either a variable speed angle grinder with a stone like this is your best option. Okay, the reason being is that these stones last forever. I bought this one over a year ago and I use it all the time, and the stones are only 20 bucks, so really good. The only thing is you need a variable speed grinder for these. So again, an extra cost. If you don't want to go with one of these, you of course can go with one of these, which is just a 1/4-inch wheel in a regular grinder. So the reason we're doing that, it's not to make this flat. The reason we're doing that is to take the scale off. Okay, the scale is really, really hard on belts. You will burn up your belts just trying to get the scale off. The scale is actually quite hard, but brittle. So we want to take the scale off just to get some silver steel here before we start surface grinding the edge. Alright, so we've ground most of this. There's still a couple of spots. You don't have to be too worried about it. Both sides look pretty good. I got most of the scale off. Optionally, if you think it's faster and your grinder isn't that fast, you could just keep going with the angle grinder to thin this out if you have pretty thick stock. But I'm going to be doing this on the plant. The best way to do this is with one of these, right? This is just a big magnet. Stick your blade to it, and there you go. So we're going to be moving this around up and down. Don't focus just pushing in one area, and once in a while you need to move the magnet around the blade, okay? Because if you just have the magnet in the center, these ends, because you're going to be pushing, it'll actually dish it a little bit. So this is a long process if you don't have a surface grinding attachment, and if you don't have a 2x72. But if you do have a 2x72, check out this link in the corner here. This will show you how to build a surface grinding attachment pretty cheap. So you can go look at that, get yourself a surface grinding attachment so you don't have to spend hours at the grinder just holding a blade there with a magnet. If you need any tools and materials for knife making, go check out Maritime Knife Supply. They have fast shipping anywhere in the US, and they got everything you need. Go check them out. Okay, so here we go, all surface ground. Okay, I may have cheated and used the surface grinding attachment, but you get the idea. It's important that while you are surface grinding, if you're going to be doing it up against the platen, you take measurements on both sides, especially both ends, and you make sure you have the same thickness, because you don't want to, have different thicknesses on different sides. That's where, of course, you need a set of digital calipers. These are, I don't even consider these optional. You must have a set of digital calipers in your shop. Like every tool I'm talking about, there's a link to my Amazon store down in the description if you want to get any of these. Most of these are in the general tools section. All right, so now that we've got our blade profiled, we've got it surface ground, we know it's nice and flat, now we want to drill some holes. I want to do the holes first before I do the bevels. This way I don't forget about them, because you don't want to forget about drilling your holes and then heat treat your blade. It's really hard to drill holes after that. But we will show you a way to even cope with that. When I consider pinholes for knife handles, there's a couple different schools of thought here. Some people like the 3 holes, some people just do 2. You do need some kind of mechanical connection on a full tang knife like this. Epoxy is not going to cut it, so by itself at least. So we're going to put pinholes. I like to do 2 pinholes. One at the back, one at the front. And here's why. There's always a kind of a conundrum. What do you do with the 3rd pinhole? Do you line it up with the other 2? Do you center it? It's always a question, and sometimes it looks off depending on what you do. So I like to swerve that all together. I never put a center pinhole. I put one in the back and one in the front. So before we even start considering pinholes, we need to find out where the front of our handle is going to be. So typically, I like my handles to be right about here. And you notice I'm putting a nice arc to make it look pretty. I've seen some people where they'll put the handle out here and the wood will actually come down. I don't like that. I think it's a weird looking style, to be honest, where the front of the handle is, first of all, is straight and it just goes too far. Usually you want it to end, it could end a little bit further forward, something like that, but around this area. So once we know the front of the handle, then we can consider our pinhole. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel the front of the handle, so I don't want the pin to be on the bevel, or worse, half on the bevel, half on the top of the handle, the top of the scale. So I don't want to make sure it's not too close. So I'm going to put my first pin right about there, okay? And you'll see why I'm making a big one here, because I'm using this kind of as marking fluid. The other one, I usually like to make it the same distance that this one is away from the front of the handle, this one is away from the back of the handle. So now, folks, don't eyeball where your actual pin is going to go, okay? Use calipers. Make sure that the pin is in the very center. I've seen people eyeball this, or they make a mistake and they do their pinholes and then they change the profile. So make sure your profile is fully done, you're happy with it, then measure and put your pinholes in. So here, okay, 96. And then now that I've got this marked, I can just go both sides and I see where they intersect. Okay, and I'll measure this one. Okay, so I know where my pins are going to go. This is just a center punch, and this one, I'm just going to take this and okay, this will just help us drill easier. So now let's talk about drilling. Obviously, the first thing you need to know is the size of the pins you're going to use. Typically, if I'm drilling pins, I'm usually using 3/16 in most knives, unless it's a really small knife. I'm usually always using 3/16. So hopefully we annealed this and we can go through this with a drill bit. A lot of people have problems because they didn't anneal the steel fully enough, so it's still hard, or sometimes it can be hard in the center, all kinds of problems. So we're going to try to drill this with a regular drill bit, see how we do. Lots of cutting fluid, we'll go slow, we'll have our drill set at the lowest setting. If that doesn't work, I've seen all kinds of, you can go buy cobalt drill bits and all of this stuff. I use high-speed drill bits, high-speed steel, like regular drill bits, quality drill bits. My favorite are these Klee lines. I just like these. These are the black and gold kind. I think this whole set is about around $50. So I prefer those. I also sharpen my own drill bits, which saves a lot of money. I've had that set of drill bits going on a year and a half. Okay, so what happens if it's hard and you can't drill through it? So you got a couple of options. You can take a torch and carefully heat just the handle, Okay, so you wrap the blade in a wet paper towel and then just heat it with a propane torch until it's red and let it cool slowly. Yeah, you can do that, but there's a better way. This is an end mill, okay? These are used normally in milling machines, and if you're not familiar with these, they typically have a flat bottom, so they're not really good at drilling to a center, okay? But this is solid carbide. This will go through even hardened steel. So I have a bunch of course, I have a milling machine, so I have a whole ton of these, but I keep a bunch of these by my drill press in 3/16 specifically. These are about $12 to $15, so very cheap. They will go through this kind of steel, any kind of hardened steel, no problem. This is a center cutting end mill. Okay, that's an important aspect. You need a center cutting end mill so that it can plunge. Most end mills cannot plunge. They're meant for doing side motion. And it is perfectly fine to put one of these in your drill press as long as you're only plunging with it. Don't try to mill with it because your drill press is not meant for that. So we'll try one of these with a regular drill bit, see if that goes through. But no matter what, I'm going to do the other one with an end mill. You will have to clamp your work down, and you should anyway, and we'll talk about that when we get to the drill press. Okay, so we're at the drill press, ready to drill. First thing is, always, always, always clamp your knife down when you're drilling, especially if you've done partial bevels. It's very easy for this drill bit to stick in this hole, spin your knife around like a helicopter, and there's been nightmare stories of these things actually cutting people's fingers off because they're spinning around so fast. So make sure that you clamp. Either if you have one of these, clamp it down, or put it in a vise, a drill vise. Just make sure it's clamped down. Okay, so I've got my drill press set about 500 RPMs. Clamp it down tight. I got my fluid ready here. Let's try it. Okay, that was no problem. We did a really good job of annealing this steel. But if you didn't anneal it really well, let's try it with an end mill. And there we go. Okay, you saw it was jumping around a little bit, but it's fine. It's a perfectly circular circle here, and even if it isn't, we're going to be drilling through the wood later with an actual drill bit, so it doesn't really matter. But that's a good way to get your holes through if you can't get a drill bit through your steel. So here we are back at the grinder, and I'll tell you why. So yeah, we drilled our pinholes, but if we just continued like this after we ground our bevels, okay, and took out a whole bunch of steel, this knife might end up being handle heavy, meaning there's more weight back in the handle. That's not so good. We want it well balanced. So, we could drill a whole bunch of holes here, but that's going to be a problem if we couldn't get through this and we'd have to use an end mill and drill a whole bunch of holes. There's an easier way that's kind of my go-to now, and that's we're just going to use the wheel on the grinder to put a hollow here, okay? You just need to be careful to stay away from the edges of your knife to make sure you don't hit the profile here. If you're nervous, then use the drilling method, but this can be pretty good. Also, you need to make sure that those hollows are pretty well balanced and well formed on either side, or you can get a warp, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so there's our knife so far. You can see we've got pretty even, whatever you call them, bevels in here, hollows in the handle. So that's going to take out some weight. We've got our pinholes, and we are ready to put some bevels in. So we're going to be doing that in the next episode. We're going to spend a whole episode on grinding basics and how to get nice bevels and really smooth grinds. So that's going to be the whole episode next time. Thanks, folks. We'll see you on the next one.